Welcome to Asian American Life. I'm Ernabelle DeMillo. We're kicking off the new year inside the Museum of Chinese in America, where they're exhibiting Gen X magazines. I'll have a special report on how these magazines became the voice of the Asian American experience. Plus, we have stories on Asian Americans in politics, arts, and social justice. Senator Andy Kim makes history in the U.S. Senate. Fred Korematsu Day is January 30th, and we reflect on what his legacy means today. Chhandayan preserves the art of Indian classical music. Plus, I wine and dine with a master sommelier. And we ring in Lunar New Year with recipes from James Beard award-winning cookbook author Kristina Cho. Before Asian American Life, there were Asian American magazines, including A.Magazine behind me. When I first saw this magazine on the newsstands back in the 90s, seeing an Asian American on the glossy cover meant everything. And now these magazines are part of Asian American history. So I just love this cover.
Oh yeah, this was wonderful to work on.
For Gen Xers like me, the latest exhibit at the Museum of Chinese in America is a walk down memory lane.
Somebody took my mom's basement and put it up on the wall.
The magazines on the wall, some may be found in a parent's basement, are part of MoCA's latest exhibit, Magazine Fever Gen X Asian American Periodicals. Lakan Angelo Ragaza was editor-in-chief of A.Magazine. The glossy publication, started by Jeff Yang, Amy Chu, Sandy Kim, and Bill Yao in 1989, was one of the most well-known English-language publications dedicated to Asian American culture and issues.
Just the ability to be creative, to show Asian Americans in ways that I just didn't really see them. Right? First of all, to show Asian Americans on a magazine cover, right? To show Asian Americans modeling fashion, to show Asian Americans creating fashion lines. Just there were no reference points for this with the magazines that I grew up and loved reading as a teenager.
The 80s, 90s, and early 2000s were the heyday of Asian American magazines, reflecting the increased visibility of AAPIs. Along with A, there were magazines like Yoke, Jade, Giant Robot, Asiam, Rice, Hyphen, and Asian Week, which started in 1979 and was the first national magazine focusing on AAPI interests.
Really, the significance of this exhibit is showing how Asian Americans took control of their own narrative. Magazines were the first time that Asian Americans ever had editorial control over their own image, over how they wanted to be portrayed, because Asian Americans really didn't have control over books, music, television, movies, all the traditional medias that you think.
The exhibit is not only a look back at the history of magazines, but it's also a lesson on Asian American history.
The story of Asian American magazines for us starts in the 1960s and 70s. This is like the birth of the Asian American movement. This kind of political moment where a lot of student activists particularly were involved in anti-Vietnam War protests and, battles for creating ethnic studies programs in college campuses.
In 1968, Berkeley student activists coined the term Asian American, uniting Asian groups under one shared identity to increase political power and advocacy.
So Asian Week was definitely very politically focused and would always publish the census data on Asian Americans. And the publishers, we actually had a chance to interview the son of the original founding publisher, would tell us they would mail them to each of the politicians, not only locally, but nationally.
When the next generation of Asian Americans came of age, magazines broadened their focus to culture, entertainment, fashion, and art, with a sprinkle of politics. Back then, you were hard-pressed to find an Asian person on the cover of mainstream magazines, like Vanity Fair, Rolling Stone, or People.
Until I met the people involved with A.Magazine, I didn't realize that I was hungry to see reflections of myself and my experience. I just didn't know. And then once I understood there was a possibility, I was just like, oh, this has been missing. And once that realization came to me, there was nothing that could stop me from being a part of it.
Ragaza recently reunited with some of his former co-workers, including founder Jeff Yang, for a panel at the museum. It was a packed house as the mostly Gen X crowd and their children took photos and reminisced about the magazine days. One fact that surprised event-goers was learning that behind the glitz and glossy covers, many of the writers and editors did not get paid.
I was so driven to help make this happen, to help foreground and center Asian American faces, stories, and experiences. I did it for free for 5 years, and I had never had this thought, oh, I'm working for free. I just felt like I was helping to sort of create something that needed to come into being.
A.Magazine's last issue was published in February 2002. The others either stopped printing or went online. Publishing was very expensive unless you owned a printing press, like the publishers of Asian Week.
The reason that it was able to serve as a voice for us was not because it was commercially viable or the most popular, but that family actually owned the printing press. So they were printing the newspapers and the magazines for other publications, and this was a labor of love on the side, but they were able to give us a voice for 30 years because their platform was the printing press.
For the rest, it was truly a labor of love, and today these magazines from a bygone time are part of the Asian American story in America, and you could put that on the cover. I'm Ernabelle DeMillo for Asian American Life.
I'm Kyung Yoon. Senator Andy Kim has made history as the first Korean American to be elected to the U.S. Senate, representing his home state of New Jersey. A milestone moment for not only the newly minted senator, but for his immigrant community.
And that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which you are about to enter, so help you God.
I do.
Congratulations. Congratulations to you both, to the whole family.
When Andy Kim was sworn in as a U.S. Senator by Vice President Kamala Harris, it was an emotional moment for many of his fellow Korean Americans.
I think everyone is just so proud to see the first Korean American senator. You know, for me as an elected official, as a politician, to see someone elevated all the way to the U.S. Senate is so exciting.
New York State Assemblywoman Grace Lee says Kim's election is significant because it paves the way for a new generation of Asian Americans to dream and aspire to the highest levels of political leadership in America.
It is really important for people like my daughters to see people who look like them at the U.S. Senate. You know, that's something that they can envision themselves doing one day. He's such an incredible role model for our younger generations and for me.
Kim, the son of South Korean immigrants, took office on December 9th. This was 3 weeks earlier than the start of the new Congress on January 3rd. An interim member stepped down so that Kim could fill the remainder of former Senator Bob Menendez's term. Menendez had resigned from the Senate after being convicted on corruption charges. The former three-term congressman ran on a promise to restore integrity to the office. His reputation as a public servant was burnished after the rampage in the Capitol on January 6, 2021, when a photographer captured this image of then-Congressman Kim on his knees, picking up trash in the halls of the Capitol. Much has changed for the 42-year-old senator since he sat down for an interview with me when he was first running for Congress in 2018. But his reasons for being in the political arena remain constant.
We can't assume that someone else will carry that mantle for us. Visibility of different communities and the visibility of problems here in America, you need to make sure you have champions both inside and outside of government working together for common cause.
And while Senator Andy Kim is proud to be the first Korean American senator and the first Asian American to represent New Jersey in the U.S. Senate, he promises to serve all of his constituents, whether they voted for him or not.
and to help usher in a new era for New Jersey politics. I'm Kyung Yoon for Asian American Life.
This January, we celebrate the life of Fred Korematsu, the civil rights leader who resisted the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, and whose case went all the way to the Supreme Court.
I was determined that my rights were violated, and making me enemy alien was wrong.
That civil rights leader, Fred Korematsu, in a 1996 interview, courtesy of Densho, an organization preserving stories of Japanese Americans incarcerated during World War II. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 that forcibly removed more than 120,000 Japanese Americans, many of them U.S. citizens, into concentration camps. The then 23-year-old Fred Korematsu, a native of Oakland, California, refused to comply. He chose to stay in the city, determined not to be uprooted from his home.
I knew that as soon as they realized that they're free, that they were going to catch.
Were you afraid of being arrested?
No, I wasn't, because I didn't feel that I did anything wrong, because I figured it was unconstitutional as they were doing.
The American-born Nisei was arrested and labeled a spy, then convicted and imprisoned for defying the internment order. He appealed the conviction, and his case went all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1944, in a controversial 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that incarceration was justified due to military necessity. But in the 1980s, new evidence revealed the Justice Department had knowingly withheld information from that 1944 Supreme Court case, showing that intelligence documents found no evidence that Japanese Americans were ever a threat. Korematsu's conviction was overturned in 1983 on the basis of government misconduct, and it laid the groundwork for the 1988 Civil Liberties Act.
My fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong. More than 40 years ago, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the United States were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in makeshift internment camps. This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race.
The U.S. government apologized to Japanese Americans and granted $1.6 billion in reparations. In 1998, Fred Korematsu received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Korematsu passed away at the age of 86 in 2005. In 2010, California passed the Fred Korematsu Day. Today, more than a dozen states and New York City celebrate Fred Korematsu Day on January 30th. For Asian American Life, I'm Rainer Ramirez.
Preserving and promoting Indian classical music, dance, and culture is a mission at nonprofit Chhandayan.
I feel like this definitely does bring you closer to your culture and teaches you about the tradition, the discipline.
Definitely helps me connect to my culture. Makes me learn what my previous ancestors, what they did, how they practiced, how they studied.
Teaching music and dance with a cultural component is a focus at Chhandayan Center for Indian Music, where tabla virtuoso and founder Samir Chatterjee keeps his classical Indian performing arts alive and thriving.
The presence of Indian music, Indian culture, Indian dance here in the West, particularly in New York, needs some reinforcement with authenticity. So someone who has connection with the tradition, knows the tradition well, and ready to make sacrifices to maintain the tradition.
A calling Chatterjee answered when he established Chhandayan in India in 1984, then expanded it to New York City a decade later.
Some of the great musicians they have been supporting. In fact, Ravi Shankar personally was very happy when we founded it by Times Square. This was their dream since 1960s, that one day Indian music will be placed in the center of the earth. That's how we proudly claim New York City to be.
The center has since opened branches throughout the U.S. and in Canada, offering one-on-one and group lessons in a number of customary Indian instruments and dances.
I personally teach tabla. That's the only instrument, but I play other percussion instruments also, and I compose. Vocal, of course, classical and raga-based songs, sitar, sarod, flute, Indian flute, two types, Carnatic flute and Hindustani bansuri, bamboo flute. And then sarangi, the Indian violin, beautiful instrument, and dance, Bharatanatyam, Orisi, and Kathak, three types of dances, classical dances.
The origins of Indian classical music date back over 6,000 years ago to the sacred Vedic scriptures. Chatterjee says the profound relationship between Indian music and spirituality is at the core of his musical teachings.
The frequencies and vibrations that are used in this type of music have a much deeper and widespread impact on all living organisms. In the ancient Indian culture, there was a practice of making fire sacrifices where they would sit around and chant. The chanting effect, as you are going to the church or any other, those sound vibrations also, they spread. They are not contained within the four walls. And they have impact not only to on the people who are right there on the spot, but much beyond.
In addition to lessons, the volunteer-driven Chhandayan Center spreads these teachings through workshops, seminars, concerts, and community outreach.
And we've been trying to creating access to the underserved communities to be in their community center, interact with them, old age homes and assisted living facilities. Two particular occasions when we take our productions, the Holi Festival, which is the Festival of Colors, and Diwali Festival, Festival of Light. Every year we do go send out performers or student performers to different occasions.
For these tabla students, the lessons learned here are more than just musical.
Being introduced to this instrument, I realized how much just endless learning there is, endless self-discovery that you get throughout this process. And that's ultimately what's drawing me to continue.
Not only is it just a tabla lesson, but it's also like life lessons.
For Asian American Life, I'm Susan Jun.
And now let's toast a star in the wine and beverage field. He's a recent sommelier of the year, and now he has his own wine company.
So we smell first?
Yeah.
And what are we smelling?
Smell if it smells good.
Actually, it smells amazing.
It smells amazing. I think the biggest misconception about sommeliers is that we're snobby people, which still we can be at times. But I think in general, this current era of sommeliers, at least in New York City, and to be frank, most of the United States that I've visited, are really humble, hardworking people who are geeks and are passionate about wine and where it's from and how it's made and who's making them, and they just want to tell that story.
Jonel Falnar is a self-described wine geek with a story to tell, his own. In just 10 years, he went from wine aficionado to being crowned sommelier and beverage director of the year in 2023 by Wine Enthusiast.
I was very shocked, if I'm being honest. It's not something that I'm necessarily kind of looking out for in terms of like awards or like a pat on the back, so to speak. But I recognize the gravity of these awards and what they also mean for the industry and also for our companies. And so it was definitely a happy moment for me.
All modesty aside, Falnar's ascent into the wine world was a quick one. When he moved to New York from Asia, he enrolled in the International Culinary Center in Soho. With his ICC certificate in hand, he got a job as sommelier at Nomad Restaurant. Then came New York's so-called Korean restaurant wave. Falnar's wine journey just happened to coincide with the rise of elevated Korean dining. He's currently the beverage director of Naun Hospitality, the restaurant group helmed by the husband and wife team of Elia and JP Park, who are making waves in the culinary world. They are the force behind 3 of New York's finest Korean restaurants, Attaboy, Naro, and the 2 Michelin-starred Atomix, where we met Falnar. Atomix was named the top 8th restaurant in the world. You heard me right, the world, with Falnar making sure the chef's menu is complemented with the perfect glass of wine.
So this is the Shisto Cru 2019, and I love this wine personally, and so it's one of the gems in our cellar that we kind of try to get here and there when we can have it.
Falnar didn't set out to be a sommelier. Born and raised in the Philippines, he studied business in college. After graduation, he moved to Tokyo and worked in retail.
So I was living in Japan for about 1.5 years, and I was living alone. It was my first job outside of university, and I really just kind of picked out a few bottles of wine from a normal wine shop and just started enjoying it with friends.
It wasn't until he moved to New York that he actually thought about it as a profession.
What did your family think when you told them that you were, thinking about this career path?
That is such a great question. Sorry, Mom. No, I think there was definitely some hesitation in the very beginning, especially with my parents not understanding why I wanted to get into wine or the restaurant industry as a whole.
Wine culture has long been rooted in Europe and white America, from the vineyards to consumption to the custom of food pairings. In fact, less than 10% of the master sommeliers in the world are Asian. But the industry is starting to shift as more Asian and Asian Americans pursue careers as professional stewards of wine. Wine enthusiasts just featured the rising Filipino sommeliers, including Ana Cristina Cabrales, who we featured in 2019. And this year's Master Sommelier class of inductees was the most diverse in history, including an Asian American and a Pacific Islander. And many, like Falnar, are being acknowledged for their work. He has garnered awards from Best New Sommelier to Rising Star Sommelier, and he knows full well the impact he has on the next generation, as he recalls a recent meeting with a young person who called him a role model.
I'd never thought I would be representing, our country in a certain way, but it was a powerful moment where I thank you for saying that. It's great that you can feel inspired because I'm doing okay in what I'm doing.
What's next for Falnar? Well, pour yourself a glass. This wine connoisseur still has a lot of stories to tell. Let's toast to that. I'm Ernabelle DeMillo for Asian American Life.
James Beard award-winning author Kristina Cho is out with a new cookbook, Chinese Enough. It's inspired by her childhood, her family, and she presents it as a gift to anyone who has lived with more than one culture at home.
One night I was going to make salt and pepper tofu for dinner, but I realized I didn't have any tofu. But I did randomly have some pre-made gnocchis.
Salt and pepper gnocchi. Just a taste of how Kristina Cho blends her Midwestern sensibility and her Chinese heritage through cooking. Her cookbook, Chinese Enough, is filled with Cantonese-style recipes and the stories behind them, a personal celebration of how Chinese culture informs her Americanness and vice versa.
I felt like so much of my childhood was kind of walking along this line of feeling not enough of one thing or another. I personally felt not Chinese enough when I was around my family. But then when I would be around my classmates, I would feel not American enough either. It took years, it took writing this book for me to find this like level of confidence of saying like, I am enough. There's authenticity in so many of the ways that we move through life.
To purists who insist only a traditional approach makes authentic Chinese cuisine, Cho says traditions not only evolve, change is inevitable because of every family's experience with time and place. Her culinary creations highlight her Cleveland upbringing, the Cantonese flavors of her family's cooking, their immigrant experiences, and her current life in California.
My mom's spaghetti, which is a version of Chinese spaghetti. It's ground beef, oyster sauce, ketchup, white pepper. There's a cornstarch slurry, so you get this like glossy, silky sauce. She created it when she was 13 years old, and she moved to the United States when she was 6 from Hong Kong. And she created it because she was just tired of eating rice. She was tired of eating Chinese food every single day, because that's how my grandparents cook, you know?
Chinese Enough is also chock full of fun takes and twists on traditional dishes for Lunar New Year, like San Francisco garlic noodles. Noodles symbolize longevity in Chinese culture.
Plate up the noodles with some green onions or cilantro.
And chicken and cabbage spring rolls. Their golden color represents prosperity.
Enjoy.
And of course, there are recipes for lots of dumplings, a dish that's supposed to bring good luck in a new year because they look like very full pouches of money. Cho's grandmother's recipe for blooming steamed cupcakes, another of her family's New Year traditions, is not in this cookbook, but in her first one, the 2-time James Beard award-winning mooncakes and milk bread.
They bloom, and the act of, or the visual of them blooming is supposed to symbolize like growth and like prosperity and stuff. The secret ingredient to my grandma's steamed cupcakes is Bisquick. You know, which is like such a non-traditional ingredient, you know, and
but very American.
But so it's so American. Like I know I've connected with other people like that's so cool because my grandma uses Bisquick to make her famous buttermilk biscuits, you know, and it has this like kind of crossover connection.
You certainly don't need a holiday to enjoy Kristina Cho's delicious recipes. But to find out more, check out her blog, eatchofood.com. For Asian American Life, I'm Vivian Lee.
And that's our show for now. If you're in the area, be sure to check out Magazine Fever Gen X Asian American periodicals. The exhibit will be up until March 30th. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram and download the CUNY TV app so you can watch us on the go. I'm Ernabelle Danilo. We'll see you next time.